poetry tonight. Thank you all for joining us here this evening, and if you're watching this recording at a later date, thank you for joining us as well. We have an incredible conversation ahead of us tonight. My name is Joanna Erskine. I'm the Head of Education at Bell Shakespeare, and I will be the host for this evening's conversation. Now, as Lydia just mentioned, this is the very first in a monthly panel series called Comedies, Histories and Tragedies, which is presented by the State Library of New South Wales in partnership with Bell Shakespeare. And each conversation and event focuses on a particular play, and it's all part of the celebrations for the 400th anniversary of the publication of the first folio. And you, of course, here in this very building is Australia's only copy of the first folio, and you can see it and the library's other folios as part of the For All Time Shakespeare in Print exhibition, which actually runs all the way to February 2024. So there's plenty of time to enjoy it. And the first folio, of course, is extremely significant because it was compiled by Shakespeare's friends, published 7 years after his death. And had it not been for the first folio, we may have lost a significant number, 18 remarkable plays of Shakespeare's that had not previously been published. And these include Macbeth, Julius Caesar, As You Like It, and The Tempest. But tonight we are talking about Richard III. The play, its history, reflections on the play in performance, and we're going to hear from some incredible Australian artists and minds. Now, Richard III is Shakespeare's second longest play after Hamlet, and it's also second only to Hamlet in the number of lines that a title character has, as a few of the people sitting beside me understand all too well. So let's meet our panel. And I must say, this is one of those situations where you think, who would I put on a panel to talk about Richard III? And then you think about a dream panel, and then you ask all those people, and they all say yes. So we're incredibly fortunate, and I hope that we haven't peaked too soon with this series, with this amazing panel. So here they are. From the University of Sydney, Associate Professor Hugh Griffiths. Actor and writer Thomas Campbell. Actor, writer, dramaturg, Kate Mulvany. And actor, director, and the founding artistic director of Bell Shakespeare, John Bell. Now, 3 people up here have played Richard III, unless Hugh Griffiths, you have managed to as well. I'm making an assumption there. Tom, you played Richard in 2009 at a production at Carriage Works, which was directed by Kate Gall. Kate, you played Richard in 2017 for Bell Shakespeare, directed by Peter Evans. And John, I believe you have played Richard 3 times. First at the Nimrod, directed by the great Richard Wherrett. Secondly, in 1992 for Bell Shakespeare, and then in 2002, a co-production between Bell Shakespeare and Queensland Theatre, directed by Michael Gow. Now, before we get to the playing of it, Hugh, do you mind setting the scene for us? Richard III was written in the early part of Shakespeare's writing career. What would Shakespeare's source material have been for the play? What was going on in England at the time?
I mean, a lot was going on in England at the time. It was a really kind of troubling time in England, 1590s. So we think Shakespeare wrote this around 1592, coming into 1593. It is a really long text, as you suggest, and that's probably because the text that we've got is partly made up of his manuscript. And he was probably interrupted in writing that manuscript by the plague that arrived in 1592. And it may just need a bit of editing, as most people find out when they try and put it on. What was going on? Well, it was a troubling time for Elizabeth. So she'd been an incredibly popular ruler for most of her career, but in the 1590s, she was met with a lot of political opposition, a lot of controversy. She was becoming increasingly tyrannical. She was becoming increasingly embattled, old, her grip on the throne fading rapidly. And so all of that contentiousness, that political contentiousness you see in the play, and that's really what motors the plot, constant infighting around who gets to be close to the throne or even on the throne, that is really rattling around London as this play is put on stage.
And in terms of source material, are we looking, I believe Sir Thomas More was an inspiration?
Yeah, so Shakespeare draws off official histories, but also a kind of long-standing Tudor tradition. So Elizabeth's a Tudor monarch, which really demonises Richard III, that produces him as a villain, as the villain. And the political reality that Shakespeare's audience are living in, Tudor England, is absolutely dependent on him dying and absolutely dependent on him being defeated at the end of this play. So that when one of these actors stands up and says that word now at the start of the play, it's a really arresting word to start the play, Shakespeare's audience know that that now doesn't last very long, and in fact that it has to not last very long for their political reality to come true. So what they're witnessing is the birth of their era and the death of the previous era, and that's dependent on Richard being an absolute bastard and needing to be defeated. And so we get this long-standing tradition in which he's demonized, that his physical disability is used as a sign of his villainy, that he's seen as a Machiavellian kind of character, willing to do anything to maintain power. And we see that in the play, don't we, where he's standing between the two bishops and pretending to be pious, and we know that that's not true. And somebody who's just willing to, I guess, cut through all his relatives in order to get to the throne. So Shakespeare's dealing with a long-standing tradition. So Thomas More is one of them, but Henry VII, Richmond in the play, Henry VII commissions a historian called Virgil to write a history of Britain, and a big feature of that history of Britain is a depiction of Richard as deformed, as malicious. He even says at one point that he keeps biting his face, keeps biting his nether lip, and this is a sign of his malice trying to burst forward out of his body. And so straight from the first official Tudor histories of Richard, we get this quite close connection between the way he looks, the way he behaves, and his evident, to the Tudor audience, villainy. And this is really repeated by Thomas More. And once Thomas More writes his history of King Richard III, whilst Henry VIII is on the throne, then that Tudor official version of Richard III gets absolutely solidified. So this is the story that Shakespeare inherits and has no real reason to question. I mean, this is the story that celebrates his monarch, Elizabeth I. But I think there are some questions, though, still to ask about how this might be placed in relation to Elizabeth. So one of the things that is kind of obvious, I guess, to a Tudor audience is that Richard has to die and Elizabeth has to inherit the throne. It's all very glorious. But actually, by this point, the person that Elizabeth most looks like in the play isn't Richmond, but is Richard. She's increasingly isolated, increasingly prone to a kind of tyrannical behavior, executing her enemies and so on, and increasingly surrounded by enemies. And so the stories that are being told in the history plays, not just Richard III, but other Shakespeare history plays, are really momentous stories for Shakespeare's audience. They appear like they were quite a long time ago, but it's their political reality that's being shown to them. It's the world that they've emerged from and that they're fearful really of going back to. Elizabeth is about to die. As Shakespeare's writing this, she actually has got another 10 years, but they weren't to know that. She just lives a long time. It just seems like she's about to die. And she has no heir. And so we're about to plunge the country into the kind of political chaos that we witness on stage in this play.
Thank you. And you've touched on a few things that we're going to talk about further, particularly about, as you mentioned, Richard's physicality and what Elizabethan audiences, how they would have perceived that, and definitely an approach for performers, how they manage that. But you talk about his actions, and I'd like to talk, and John, I'd like to throw this to you. The fact that on paper, Richard is detestable. He has his eyes set on the English throne, seemingly kills everyone in his way to get it, including organising the murders of his wife, his brother, little nephews in the tower. He seems to hate the world and want revenge and only revenge. So, John, why do we like him so much?
You sound like me. Well, I think it's a mistake to play Richard like some detestable creature. I saw a performance by Anthony Sher, which was much praised. I saw it at the Adelaide Festival, and he hopped around on 2 crutches, and he was like a spider, with 4 legs. And the athleticism of it, the images were extraordinary. But he was so snarling and bitter and nasty. I thought, no one's going to believe this guy. No one's going to want to follow this person, The key to Richard is his charm. He's totally charming and, full of guile and full of false promises, and people believe him. That's the important thing about him. I played it 3 times, and the last time I played it, I was accused of being too charming. And I thought, well, okay, that's what I think he is. You look at anybody who's got to the top in certain, arenas, charm and selling themselves is the greatest weapon they have. So he manages to persuade Buckingham and Anne and Hastings. He persuades everybody that he's on their side. He's their best mate, and so you've got to play that. Otherwise, they all look like idiots if they're, kowtowing to someone who's a freak and a monster. Richard thinks he is a freak and a monster. He knows he is, but he doesn't show that to anybody, except now and then to the audience. But as far as they're concerned, he's Bertolt Brecht used Richard III as a paradigm for the rise of Hitler. In his play Arturo Ui, he combined Shakespeare and Hitler and Al Capone into one character, the rise of a gangster to the top. And there's 3 stories about Al Capone, the gangster, Hitler, the warmonger, and Richard, the devious character. We're all combined in this one character, which was a marvellous combination. To get to play all 3 in one part was fantastic. His raison d'etre is totally clear from the very beginning. He says what he wants and he goes to get it. And I think for the audience, they've got to be with him a lot of the time because he's so funny, he's witty, he's charming, he's clever. He's the smartest kid on the block by miles. And the people he's up against, for the most part, are not very commendable characters. You don't mind seeing them sort of, get the chop. But when he murders his 2 little nephews, I think that's when the audience turns against him and says, no, enough is enough. Be as charming as you like. We don't want you anymore. Get out of the way and let someone else take over.
Yes, and the relationship, I think, obviously Richard's relationships with a lot of characters in the play are incredibly important, and as you say, he needs to be trusted in order to enact what he does. However, it seems that one of his most important relationships is with the audience. And Kate, he draws us in from the first line of the play. Can you talk to us about the opening soliloquy?
Oh, I'd love to.
How exactly does he hook us, and why is that opening soliloquy so important?
Well, I mean, I might be wrong here, JB, but you might. It's one of the first Shakespeare's. It's one of the first Shakespeares that starts with the protagonist, just being there. We don't hear about them entering. We don't get, hark, so-and-so's arriving in half an hour. We get him coming straight down and saying that all-important word, now is the winter of our discontent. And he starts with a joke too. This son of York can mean the son of York or the son. And the charm is all there in that first soliloquy. And the brilliant thing about it is also the audience gets to take in Richard, depending on the staging, but more often than not, he is front and centre, and we get to see who he is physically as well. So he's presenting as often as a character with a physical inability or disability, but also he is so smooth. He is so suave. He's so charming. He's so funny. It's all sparkly and twinkly and a bit of a wink. And the audience can't help but come along with him, which immediately makes them complicit. And you can feel it when you perform it. When it's a production that's really flying, you can feel the moment that they start to realise that they're part of this, around Lady Anne's death, definitely around the murder of the children. And I think that the brilliance of that first soliloquy is the vowels that Shakespeare uses. Now is the winter of our discontent. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths. It's wooing. It's really sexy. And you can feel the audience kind of going, oh, I can hear this. I understand. By the end of the play, he's very staccato. It's all spits. You get very spitty in Richard III at the end because it's all very brief, a horse, my kingdom for a horse, and very brief sentences. It's such a difference to that first soliloquy. And there is just something so delightful about being able to look at an audience and go, I'm the villain. And you're going to come with me, aren't you? And they all go, yeah. Yeah.
And I remember in the production, you spent some time before even the now walking around, eyeballing the audience, smiling at them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had to get to know them. You have to know who's out there and who's going to be on your side and who you're going to... it's beautiful to be able... It's a great gift, I think, as an actor to be able to speak to someone in the audience. It's something we don't get. We don't get that gift in film and TV. And it's the great trait of theatre is the immediacy and the connection. And Richard takes advantage of that. But... we'll get onto it later, but I think he has every right to as well.
Well, we should talk. I think let's address early in this conversation the age-old question of nature versus nurture with Richard. We see in the play firsthand how Richard is spoken about by his family, by his own mother. Says some very interesting things directly to him. We see how he is treated and he shares that he has been treated this way his whole life. So, Tom, is this why he is the way that he is?
Well, I think as an actor you have to approach it, nurture leads him to behave the way he behaves. Otherwise it's just a two-dimensional villain. Yes, his mother is absolutely atrocious to him, and... as is everyone else. They speak about him and describe him in so many horrific ways, basically about his physical disability. I was really interested when I played the role to kind of isolate what Richard says about himself, and really the only thing he says about himself as a physical disability is that he has a withered hand, which I luckily do as well. So everyone else are the characters that actually put that upon him, and I was really interested to play with prejudice and... people basically creating this monster rather than actually take the physical life on. He says about himself that he halts, but really, I think going through the play the last couple of days, it's just the only thing he says is that he has a withered hand, and everyone else says he's a bunchback toad. So I actually didn't do anything physically different when I played the role. But yeah, back to the nurture nature, it's definitely a nurture thing. I think he's come to a point where he's been treated so horrifically most of his life, he probably just goes, F you all, I'm going to see what I can get and go after it. And I think that's the joy in playing it as well. I think he has so many check-ins with the audience in his soliloquies where he goes, did you just see that happen? I can't believe that actually my plan came to fruition. But yeah, it's definitely... I think he's just over the world and he's just going to get what he can get. And I think throughout the play he's very surprised when he gets a lot of the things, they fall his way. And then ultimately when he gets the one thing he's gone after, he then becomes a little paranoid and isolated, and that's where the downfall begins.
I'll just add to that, Joe, the nurture part of it. When you see the three plays preceding Richard III, Henry VI, Part 1, 2 and 3, and see Richard emerging from those plays, you understand a lot more about why he's the way he is, that he's been brought up in a very brutal society that is full of murder and treachery and brothers against brothers and, so much hatred and violence. You think, well, no wonder he's the way he is. It's unusual if he wasn't like that. So the nurture thing is not just the fact that his mother hates him, which Charles Dickens said was one of the worst things could happen to a man if your mother hates you. He had some reason to say that. But yes, the contempt and the hatred piled upon him is just one aspect of his bringing up, but the other one is such a violent family and violent society. So you wonder about all these kids in Ukraine and other pockets of war. What will those kids be like when they grow up if all they've known is bloodshed and violence and revenge? And it's a terribly worrying thought about the next generation of people in those war zones, how they will emerge and what they will become.
And yes, if your mother tells you she wishes she'd strangled you in her accursed womb,
Yeah.
you've got to wonder.
Not a great start to life.
Not a great start. So then I guess I'll open this up on the back of that to everyone. Should we have empathy for Richard? Kate?
Yes. God, yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I did the same as Tom. I went through the play again today. It's lovely to revisit. But, those words that are hurled at him. Not just words, but ideas. I mean, he's told that the day he was born, the owls started shrieking and the midwives started weeping. And, that he had an effect on society as a 1 minute year old, that 1 minute old, that he was laying in his crib and somehow the world shifted a bit. That was the power of his evil. And if you're told that from an early age, I think we have to have empathy. If you're called an abortive rooting hog and a bunch-backed toad and my particular favourite, a homicide. You are a homicide. Those words just thrown at him from the day he was born, I just think you have to have empathy for him. A lot of the words that are in the play, I live with a disability as well. I have the back of Richard III, the spine of Richard III, and spent most of my childhood bald, getting through cancer. And
but you're also a descendant of Richard III, you tell me.
I am. I found out I'm a descendant of the man himself, so maybe I'm a bit biased. But there is something about the words that are used, deformity. Tom, you'd probably feel the same way, I'm sure. On my medical records, those words are there. Deformity, abnormality, atrophy, disability. Disability's okay, I don't mind disability. But these horrible words that are we have to have as labels on us. We go through life labelled with those words. And Richard has that in spades from the moment he's born. And so, therefore, yes, deep empathy.
Despite his actions.
But that's what I mean about the air getting sucked out of the room. There comes a point where, he says, I think it's in Henry VI, there is no one that loves me. There is no one that loves me. He says that before we even enter Richard III. So if we know that that's the mindset of this person, it's not going to go well. But I think the thing that's most important is that we are all complicit in it. No matter what he does, we've all got a little bit of blame in that. Yeah.
And even if the audience finds it hard to find empathy, the actor playing it has to have tremendous empathy, because without that you can't say, I'm going on to play the villain. You're going to play a person with this mindset and this ambition and this resentment. And you feel utterly justified in doing that. You can't think I'm playing a villain, you think I'm playing the hero.
Yes.
Historically as well, people with disability have been hidden away and shunned and outcasts, and I thought a little bit about when I was playing the role. I remember Prince William and Prince Harry imagining if one of them was born with a physical disability, what would have happened? What is it like to be someone so physically different in the most famous family in the world, and how the shame around it, not only that he would be feeling, but also his family projecting onto him. I'm sure we all have reams and reams of work that we did to find our own empathy into the character. Yeah. And that's the challenge with the role, to really try and get the audience to come with you and feel that. There is a line in the last monologue on the battlefield, or one of them, where he says about pity. Mm-hmm. He says, I don't want pity.
Soul will pity me.
Yeah, no soul will pity me when I don't pity myself, which is heartbreaking, I find, that line.
Yes, he says, myself confound. Mm-hmm. He's trying to find his own way through his own psychology, and he just happens to be taking us with him. Yeah.
And so the character, we're of course talking about the character that Shakespeare wrote of Richard III, but we should talk about the fact that quite a few people in this world feel that Shakespeare took a lot of creative license with history and in fact formed a group called the Richard III Society. Hugh, do you want to tell us a little bit about the society and the mission?
Well, I mean, I don't know that much about the society itself, but I know that he has a kind of twin reputation, doesn't he, Richard? Where he's often people try and rescue him from Shakespeare's supposed kind of smearing of his character. I'm not sure that... I think that one of the things that Shakespeare's doing in the play is thinking about how we might respond to Richard. So I know earlier I was saying he inherited this kind of caricature version of Richard, and he certainly does, and that's part of the currency of his stage. It's what makes the character believable for that particular audience. That's the Richard they would pay good money to go see. They want to see Richard be a villain, and lo and behold, there he is. But I think throughout the play, he is kind of playing with the idea of how we might or might not respond to this character. So even talking about him thinking about pity at the end of the play, there's that kind of heart-wrenching cry. His last cry at the end of the play, a horse, my kingdom for a horse, which is often played as like a supreme moment of pathos in Shakespeare's writing, because it's come down to that moment where this character, willing to bet his entire kind of achievement on a capacity to escape this current moment. And he's been talking about gambling all the way through the play. He always talks about gambling his life, gambling his gains and so on. And that seems like an incredible moment of pity, but for Shakespeare's audience, I always think it was probably a joke, because the most famous thing that people knew about Richard in Elizabethan England was that after he died, his body was paraded naked on the back of a horse and laughed at through the streets of Leicester before being thrown into a grave without any ceremony. And that's a big part of this Tudor history. So when people thought about this body which Shakespeare puts on display constantly throughout this play for everybody to focus on, and it's extraordinary play for that reason, that it really does feature this one character almost constantly throughout the play, really asking people to look at him. But the one thing that Shakespeare's audience knew about his body was that it was a thing of fun, something to be thrown away or laughed at the end, paraded through the streets on a horse. So it's kind of hard to know how to read that final line. That line, I'm sure, for actors, has to be filled with pathos. It's the end point of that trajectory. But for Shakespeare's audience, I think it is potentially a joke, because they're thinking, well, you'll get a horse soon enough, mister, and it won't be the one you're looking for.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that would be most in their heads when they think about Richard.
I love that line. I've never thought of it that way. I find that so heartbreaking. I saw it as Richard was an extraordinary horseman, and they did a documentary after they pulled up his bones, and they looked at his spine, and they did DNA tests and everything on his bones, and they discovered that in the last few months of his life he was living almost exclusively on red wine, which sounds funny but and lovely, but I mean the disabled person here who has his back goes, that's his painkiller. And the other thing that they discovered when they got an exact replica of this man who lives with exactly Richard's spine in England, they got him on a horse, and he loved the saddle because it was a back brace, and he found that in this saddle he could do far more than he could on the ground. And so I always saw a horse, my kingdom for a horse, as not running away, but as just get me back on that horse, and I know I will fight on. I know I can fight on. If I just have my mobility device, if I have my back brace, I can keep going. So it's so heartbreaking to think of it that way too.
Isn't it? Yeah, and
it really is.
And I think it is really interesting with the discovery of the grave under the car park in Leicester. It is really interesting because one of the things that was often levelled against the Tudor propagandists is that they made up his disability, that they completely made it up. But of course, when they found the body, they realised that that wasn't true. And so it becomes a kind of interesting question about where his heroism lies. So for people who would like to kind of oppose, I guess, the Tudor propaganda and resurrect him as a good king, and there's many reasons why people see him as a great administrator and so on. But it can no longer rest on saying that this was an invention, and instead there must be something else about Richard, I guess, to resurrect and think about.
Yes, and you can still be disabled and a great king.
Yes.
I played Richard in Wollongong at one performance, and when it came to the battle scene at the end, we had so much smoke and stuff going off that they called the fire brigade, and I saw these 4 firemen appear at the back of the auditorium, and I'd wished I had the sense to call out, a hose, my kingdom for a hose. But I missed the moment.
That's great. So we have been talking about the discovery of Richard's remains, which happened in 2012, and they were found in a car park in Leicester. And Kate, you've been speaking about it a little bit, but I would love you to share what it was like for you seeing the images of the skeleton personally, and about how did that inform how you approached him?
I burst into tears. I hadn't played Richard at this stage. I hadn't been offered Richard or anything. My partner said to me, "That's you. They're your X-rays in the car park." And I just felt for him. I just went, oh my God, how did you live with the pain that I know he would have lived in without the modern assistance, which is why the red wine thing, I went, you go for it, mate. So I was very, very emotional about that, very moved. And then I got offered the role not long afterwards. And I'd spent much of my career hiding my disability and my pain. And it was Bell Shakespeare that gave me the opportunity to really present it for the first time and authentically be myself on stage. And in fact, I broke all of my rules and went to my normal posture, which is very, very crooked and bent, and that I've worked many years to break, but I was like, I'll go back to it for Bell. And at first, Peter wanted to give me a fake leg or some kind of Anthony Sher style or calipers or something. And I said, no, I've got it. I've got his you don't have to touch a thing, much like you, Tom. I said, you don't have to touch anything. I am him. And so we really worked to that. But those bones, I had pictures of them all over my dressing room. I just think it's the most extraordinary find. And I'm so glad that they did. And I'm so glad we got to learn a little bit about him, actually physically, genetically, like what he was like and what he lived with.
And I understand performing in that way, and particularly as Richard anyway, is exhausting. And I hear you had some tricks to get you through each show.
It was exhausting. I had we
have a bag of snakes down here.
I had snakes. I in my first full run through, I passed out. I fainted, and I just had no sugar. And from walking around like him and constant speaking, and so we came up with the idea of just having sugar. That he was a sugar fiend, and wherever he was, he'd just eat a snake or eat a biscuit. And the other amazing thing that helped me was John Bell on opening night. I don't know if you remember this, but you came up to me and you gave me a little kiss on the head and you said, "Well done, darling." And you said, "Don't move around so much. You're going to wear yourself out." And I went, "No, I'll be fine. And then sure enough, I got 3 shows in and I went, he was so right. I'm only 3 shows in, I've got 100 to go. So I changed the blocking so I could find moments of respite and I could save my own pain. That was the best advice I've ever been given, along with red snakes.
Thank you. And then John, having played Richard 3 times, how did you approach that character? Was it 3 different approaches? What did you learn each time?
Yes, they're very different. The first time was in Richard Wherrett's production for The Nimrod, and it was kind of weird. It was in some kind of industrial setting of factories and furnaces. I get some sort of vision of hell, I suppose, he was after. And so I played a bit like a fallen angel with bright hair dabbled in blood sort of thing. It was kind of effective. It didn't take me all the way. The next time I directed it, and I said to all the actors, we're going to play it with some sort of animal, demons. So find an animal that you relate to, and we'll use that in rehearsal. So I played it, we had a wolf in mind, Buckingham was a peacock, and so on down the line. Everyone had an animal, and we used animals and bird sort of actions and postures, and the costumes reflected that. They weren't looked like animals, but they had that sort of, I had a lot of black fur and so on. And that was okay, a bit too stylish, a bit inhuman. The last time I did it with Michael Gow directed it, he set it in, for some strange reason, Hogarth's London, sort of 18th century London, and it worked wonderfully. It was set in a kind of the Tower of London, so it was like bleak stone walls, like being inside a big kind of cavern with narrow staircases and little windows. And the costumes were kind of grand, but broken down and tatty, like at the end of a civil war, and everyone just a bit worn out and frazzled, and dirty fingernails. So it was very real, down to earth, like Hogarth is, marvellous social commentator. And so we inhabited that world, and that seemed to work, for some reason, extremely well, and played it all out for the humanity, not the style, not the sort of affectations, but just get the characters as real as possible, and that was the best go at it I've had. Next time I do it, I'll try something a bit different again.
Are we going to see you do it again?
Oh, I don't think so, darling. No.
We wish. Tom, your production that was directed by Kate Gall, that was quite a strict... I saw that production. It was quite stripped back, and I know Hugh was a big fan of that production. Maybe you can share your thoughts too. But what was the general approach, not just for you personally to Richard, but what was the production seeking to do with the play?
Well, there were 6 actors, so I played Richard and 5 others. 3 women and 2 other men played everyone else. It was quite truncated. I think it was 2 hours straight through, so not that truncated. But Kate was really, really interested in exploring what his relationship with women were through in that production particularly. So obviously we've spoken about his mother, and then we have Margaret. The 2 that I loved, the scenes that I loved playing in that kind of production where Kate was exploring that, because I think Richard doesn't, probably from his mother, but he doesn't really understand women. He doesn't get them, and he's afeard of them, I would suggest. And in the scene with Anne, which I think still to this day is one of the toughest scenes to crack. I don't think I've ever seen it cracked. Primarily more so for the actor playing Anne, unfortunately, to make it believable that she goes with him. And then Elizabeth at the end when he's asking for her daughter. It was just an exploration of that play. And as Kate said, that the scene with Elizabeth towards the end of the play, it's so spitty. It's like a little fight. It's like a sword fight, them going at each other and this attack of each other. It's just so glorious to play. But I think, that production was really focusing on what his relationship with women was, and that's what Kate was interested in kind of playing with.
Yeah, I remember loving that production. It was the first Shakespeare production I saw when I first moved to Sydney, so it kind of welcomed me to the city. I thought, okay, I can live here. This is a pretty good place to live. And it was very exciting, energetic production, I remember, and very funny, actually. But the focus on women, I think, is really well placed for a play like Richard III. The previous history plays that John mentioned, Henry VI, parts 1, 2, and 3, all feature really strong women. They're really important parts in it. We've got Margaret, we've got Joan of Arc. But the history plays after Richard III, they disappear. They become really ineffectual. So by the end of the history plays, you've got Henry V and Princess Catherine, the French princess, is this really quite ridiculous figure who's being forced to say rude words in French that she doesn't understand, and it's just really awful. So Richard III is really his last history play that features these extraordinary women who kind of motor the history. And so, I love Margaret in this play, just for her particularly if you have either watched or read the Henry VI play, so you know where she's come from and you know that she has earned her anger, and it's really good fun.
She's got nothing left to lose, does she?
No.
She just stands there and, yeah. Well, I'm going to jump because I was going to ask about women in the play as well. We've been very busy talking about the title role, of course, but this play has an incredible 52 named roles in it. And I felt like in the 2017 Bell Shakespeare production, it was really amplified, and it felt like this revolving door of men, and particularly because everyone was, swapping roles. Kate, the voices because of the sheer number of men in this play, the voices of the women are so loud and strong and clear. What was it like being on stage with these incredible? What did you think of the female characters in the play?
Well, I did the dramaturgy on it as well for 2 years prior to the production. It was very important to me that the women remained, particularly Margaret, who's so often cut. And she's so powerful and says the greatest stuff. And she's also one of the only women that he really withers next to. His insults back suddenly lack as much. They lack the cheek and the cleverness that they have with other people. With Margaret, he can't quite, he calls her a hag, and thinks that's enough, and she nails him. So it was very important to me to get the voices of the women, so much so that I went back to Henry VI in order to give more stuff to the Duchess. In Henry VI, there's that incredible speech that Henry gives to Richard about the owls shrieking and the women cried when on the day that you were born and all of that. And I decided to take that and give it to Richard's mum instead. I also took another speech of Richard's in Henry VI and put it at the end of the play as an answer to that first soliloquy, basically where he says, "It's your fault, you made me," which I thought was a nice answer. But the female voices, and when you were on stage with 3 women and playing a Richard, who I wasn't playing him as a woman, I was playing him as a man, but I'm in a female body, it was electric. It was absolutely electric.
And being opposite Sandy Gore with those
Sandy
words.
Gore as Margaret was just extraordinary. I mean, I often had to pinch myself on stage when Sandy would come at you with that voice and the insults. But it's so important. It's so important. Richard doesn't know how to respond to women. Richard, for his whole life, in my mind, has been in the corner watching the court. He's never been allowed, he's never been welcomed, he's never been invited into social gatherings the way that a prince or a king should. He's been stuck in the corner, silenced, but learning everything. But the one thing he can't learn is how to woo a woman, which is why that Anne scene is so devastating and difficult. But he has no clue how to. And I think he has love for them, but he's been told you're repulsive, and so he tries to make them lower than him even. Yeah, I think Richard III is one of them that contains all of the most powerful female presences in Shakespeare. I really love it for that. And I wish he'd continued that a little further with his histories.
And I do want to talk about the Lady Anne scene in a moment because it's extraordinary. I did want to take a moment to reference the title of tonight's event, which is, of course, taken from the opening soliloquy where Richard tells us that because he cannot prove a lover, he is determined to prove a villain. John, what do you think about Shakespeare's use of the word determined in this instance? Because we could read it as Richard saying, I'm resolved, I want to play the villain. But could it also refer to fate or predetermination of his role?
I don't think so. No, I think he's using determined in the way we would use it. Since I cannot be a lover, I am determined. I think he's very much like that, so I'll go for this instead. And He's totally cold-blooded about it, and he's got it all worked out. He knows how he's going to frame Clarence and have Clarence murdered. He's going to poison the mind of his brother, King Edward. He's always 3 or 4 steps ahead of everybody else, and it's a clearly calculated set of manoeuvres, I think. And I want to be revenged on the world. For where they've treated me, I will be revenged on the whole pack of them. I think that's his attitude.
Malvolio would be friends.
Just on that, I mean, there are really only 2 options, isn't there, in that world? There's only heroes or villains. And he's been told by the world he can't be a hero, so of course his destiny is to be the villain, so he's going to do it to the best way he can.
He's fulfilling his destiny, of course. So there are many famous scenes in this play. We've already talked about one that is particularly striking, which is Act 1, Scene 2. Lady Anne and Richard's wooing scene. Now, if you need a recap, Richard decides to woo the young Lady Anne for his bride, and he decides to do so over the body of her dead father-in-law, who Richard has just killed, and her former husband was also killed by Richard. And somehow, in this extraordinary scene, which is just incredible with Shakespeare's use of language between these 2 characters, he manages to woo her and succeed. And it almost seems, as an audience member, impossible. You just mentioned you're not quite sure you even cracked it, or that we've seen anyone do it. So, Kate, John, Tom, what is it like to play that scene, and how do you even approach that impossible task?
I think sometimes people rationalise it and say, well, she really gives in to him because she has no choice. She knows that if she doesn't, she's going to be sort of end up on a heap somewhere. This guy's going to make it, and he'll be my protector. I've got no choice but to go with him and pretend to acquiesce. But I think that's wrong. I think the reason this scene is there is to show us just how clever Richard is, that he can turn that woman around in the space of that scene, from spitting at him and full of hate to not loving him, but acquiescing, to listen at least to his proposal and consider the possibility of being with him. And it's there to demonstrate Richard's devilish cleverness. And he has to play it with absolute sincerity and real tears and real penitence. Otherwise, she looks like a fool. If the audience thinks that it's too superficial, he has to put himself through the ringer. And he does. And I think he convinces her that he's fully penitent and that now things will change and he'll be good from now on and, sorry about the past, all that sort of stuff that one hears about. And she says, oh, well, I'll give it a go. I think that's what the scene is there for. Shakespeare wants to show us just how clever and how duplicitous and how brilliant Richard is.
And he pulls out all the stops. He threatens to kill himself in the scene. He does all of that psychological manipulation on her.
He's a gaslighter.
He's a
that word
gaslighter.
didn't even exist when I
Yeah.
played
He gives her the knife.
He gives her the knife. He says, you do this to me. He talks about his father's death and how he's grieving himself, and so therefore he's a little bit broken, and that's where it's come from, and makes her all kinds of promises, and so yeah, I agree. She cannot in any way seem foolish. She does also have to survive in this world, depending on when you set the play. She has to survive. She's got women around her who are locked up, and she's completely alone in this world. So, yeah, better the devil you know.
If you just see Richard III alone, then it's harder to accept. But if you have followed the trilogy through, seen the whole Netflix series like Shakespeare's audience had, then she knows that this is the kind of world where you have to attach yourself to a strong man or else you'll go under.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, yeah. I mean, the thing about being... it's survival of the fittest in this court. That's why he has to fight too, also as someone who is looked down upon for their disability. But the people who are even lower than that in the court are the women, particularly Anne, particularly as a widow. She's useless now, isn't she? So, she finds herself in that scene even lower than Richard, the man who stands in the corner. So she's got to fight back. And it's delightful and awful all at once when was ever woman in this way wooed comes out of that scene when she's departed, and he lets the audience in on the joke.
And tells us, I'll have her, but I will not keep her long.
Yeah.
I will not keep her long.
there's an element of well, the way I played it anyway, in those lines of, can you fucking believe it?
Yeah.
I got her.
Yeah.
You know, it just is such a, it's Shakespeare, it's a play. Suspend disbelief, Thomas. But it's like a 5-minute scene, and you go, really? She really swung around that much? But I think it's a bit like sometimes when you see Streetcar, you always go, why is Stella with Stanley? It's the same sort of thing. It's a kind of magic, I imagine, the way that Anne is being played and Richard, and then something that happens in the theatre that you as an audience go, oh yeah, I believe that. Yeah.
Because for the audience, the idea of a political marriage would be the most natural thing in the world. So it's not. So the idea that she would agree to the marriage isn't the unbelievable thing. That's a kind of given, and Shakespeare could have written the play without that scene quite easily and just had them marry off stage, and nobody would care. It would just be a normal thing in the world of the play. The extraordinary thing about this play is that he does give them that really long time on stage, so that it's almost as if Shakespeare is saying, well, these political marriages, they happen all the time, but what does that really mean when you look at the two people? What does that do to the two? How do we get there? How do we get from A to B? In this world, and he allows us a kind of insight into that, which is extraordinary. I think the scene is incredible,
And that's his obsession with love, though, isn't it? Richard's and Shakespeare's. Shakespeare absolutely could have not had that. We would have gone, it's a political marriage, but it's so imbued with the idea of we can love each other. I can be there for you. You can be there for me. A very different take to marriage in that time.
Yeah, and this is one of the first plays that Shakespeare writes on his own. And it is as if he's trying to find a language that suits him in these history plays, I think. And this is the scene where it might happen, that he's trying to find a language that will suit his purposes in future plays. It's not just the kind of episodic versions of history that we get in Henry VI, as good as those plays are, which I really love them, but they're kind of episodic and quite violent and kind of broken up, particularly Henry VI Part 3, one of my favourites. But this... He gives himself more time and more space to find language that will suit him and suit his purposes from this moment on in his career. It's really he's kind of testing himself out, I think, and this scene is where he's most doing it.
Yes. And the incredible thing I think about the language in this scene is how they are, Anne and Richard, are sparring. And you know, my favourite technique that Shakespeare uses, stichomythia, where you literally, you know, hurl words back and forth, and it seems as if he's showing these are equals. They're able to do that, and she's a match for him, right, Hugh?
Oh yeah, she is a match for him. Yeah, she's no pushover, and she's making exactly the right decision. It seems ridiculous, but it's exactly the right decision that she's making.
There are, of course, many other extraordinary scenes in this play. I did want to draw allusions to, I guess, the politics and how... One in particular, Kate's laughing because you're probably thinking what I'm thinking about. When Richard and Buckingham kind of rebrand his public image and you know, pull a political publicity stunt. And there are allusions to a certain recent leader in this world who pulled the same stunt that this is starting. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
I couldn't believe when I saw that happening with Trump standing in front
Trump and
of
the Bible.
with the Bible
and
going, this is the exact scene from Richard. Everything he was saying.
Yeah.
He even had the hands on people, kind of, and I laughed at that so much, but it was terrifying. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yes, it's his cheekiest scene in the play, I think.
Yes.
To pretend to be, you have to woo me, you have to want me to be king, and you know, Buckingham has to try and rouse them up to sort of cheer for him and to proclaim him, and his posture is to stand there between two bishops with a prayer book in his hand, the total hypocrite.
Yeah.
And it works. It's you know, it gets his message across, and it's very like Trump. I agree with his Bible. Yeah.
It touches on what you were saying, Kate, before about him. I think similar in the scene with Anne as well. He seems to be, as he's been shoved to the side and just observed all his life, kind of performing versions of things he's seen other people do. So when he woos Anne, it's this idea of what it is to woo a woman, and then politically the same thing of, you know, oh no, woe is me, I could never, don't give it to me. You know, I think that's an interesting he does it in both sides, you know, the emotional connections, but also politically kind of, he's watched other people do it, I think, and is repeating it to success.
And with Buckingham, he has an ally to do it with. He's building his little army bit by bit.
But
Mike
then gets
Pence.
rid of Buckingham too.
Yeah, get rid of him.
Okay, we have to, Kate. I can't not ask you about your work with the great Al Pacino. So you worked
Who?
on that guy. You worked on a show called Hunters, which is amazing. If you haven't seen it, look it up on Amazon Prime. Al Pacino very famously played and obsessed with the character of Richard III, made a documentary called Looking for Richard, which is still on the New South Wales syllabus for students.
Is it?
Yes, it is. And was part of the effort to dig up the remains as well. Did you talk to Al about Richard?
Oh yeah, he's still obsessed, as am I. Yeah, we had on set one day. We just started working together a few weeks in, but it was still Pacino and little actress from country WA, and a light blew on set, and one of the other actors said to Al, "What's your favourite role you've ever played?" And Al said, "Oh, Richard III." And my co-star looked across at me because he knew that I'd played Richard, and he was like, "Say something." And I was going, "No, I was dressed as a nun." No. And then Josh said, "You know that there's another Richard in the room." And Al said, "Oh, is it you?" to Josh. And he said, "No." And he pointed, he goes, "The nun." And Al said, "Sister Harriet, you're Richard III too?" And I said, yeah. And we had this beautiful conversation about it. And he said to me, "What was your thing? What was your thing that you did?" And I said, "You mean physically?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, well, I actually have Richard's disability. I have a deformed spine." And he goes, "Oh, that's smart." It was the best thing anyone has ever said to me about Richard. It just validated everything from my childhood to the performance. But he absolutely loves talking about Richard. I showed him all of the Bell Shakespeare pictures of the production and everything else, because he just adores Shakespeare through and through. He used to get, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. Oh, what's he going to do? He said to me that he used to get someone, his wardrobe mistress, to curse at him and hit him before he went on stage, to chase him on stage so that he ran on like a bottled spider that had been released.
Right.
Yeah, but he had this
Smart.
You didn't think to get the stage manager to do that?
Didn't think of that. Didn't think that. Oh, maybe let's go for another round. But yeah, he's divine. Very, very sweet, humble, fun man, and he absolutely, to this day, is fascinated by Richard III. Fascinated, and has a deep empathy for him too. Yeah.
I think one of the most interesting Richards I've seen was the Georgian actor Romeo Chukvadze. He came here to Sydney maybe 20 years ago now, but I saw him play it at the Roundhouse in London, a wonderful production from Georgia. And he played it a bit like Napoleon. He had a tricorn hat and a big overcoat, etc. Because Napoleon was the great nemesis of Russia, of course. I saw him again about 5 or 6 years later at Adelaide Festival, and this time he looked like Mr. Brezhnev. It was the same production, but he had a crew cut, had a big coat with medals all down the front and a few more down the back. And I said, "Richard's changed a bit." He said, "Yes, well, we couldn't do that back then, but now we can do it, you know." He said that the Soviet censors came in to watch a rehearsal, and they said, "Who's that supposed to be?" And we said, "That's King Edward IV." And they said, "No." He said, "Yes, that's Edward IV." "You sure it's not somebody else?" And he said, "No." He said, "It was Brezhnev."
So, our final question for our panel, because we will hand over to the audience for questions in a moment. I'm assuming that if I asked you all who's your favourite character in the play, you would say Richard. So I'm going to ask you, who's your second favourite? Who's underrated in this play? Hugh, who would you say?
my favourite underrated characters don't have names. They're Murderer 1 and Murderer 2.
I like those
It's
lads.
such a good scene.
It's a fantastic scene.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
It comes at a perfect moment in the play. We don't really care about Clarence too much, I don't think. So the murder of Clarence can be played like a joke. But I am going to put my kind of academic hat on and say it's a really important scene as well. It gets to the heart of the political problem in the play really quickly and with jokes. So their problem is that they've been told to kill a nobleman by somebody who's their superior, but they know that being a murderer is sinful. And so they go to these kind of long-winded jokes around, well, who do we obey? Do we obey God or do we obey the king? Do we obey? And it's really, that goes to the heart of the political problems of the play. Like, what is the right thing to do? What's the godly thing to do? And it is at the heart of most political theory in Elizabethan England as well. So Shakespeare's having a really good time in that scene with questions that the audience would have been considering as well. What happens when somebody you've been told has a God-given right to rule over you, tells you to do something really awful, and you know that you shouldn't do it? And it's a concern that rattles through all the way through the history plays, particularly in Henry V. It comes up time and time again, this idea that Henry V himself is doing terrible things, and we don't know whether he's allowed to do them or not. So yeah, Murderer 1 and Murderer 2 for two reasons. One, they're very funny, but two, they have a really good lesson on political theory for the audience.
Love it. Tom?
I think I'd say Elizabeth, just because the scene when Elizabeth challenges him when he's asking for her daughter's hand in marriage, he's at that point, he's already been crowned, I think, he's king at that point, and she has, throughout the play, he, I think, has nothing to lose. He's just going after it because he's got nothing to lose. And at that point, she doesn't either. And it's a great kind of battle of minds, and it's very, what was the word you used about the stabbing text? The Shakespearean...
Oh, Stichomythia.
Yeah, it feels very Stichomythia. Yeah. It's just a great battle of minds, I think, that scene. Yeah, and she's got I think she's got a great journey through the play as well.
Kate?
Margaret for all the reasons I spoke about before. She's such a force of nature. She's lived a life, and she sees exactly who he is, and she calls it out. But she's also we're all incredibly ageist about her. She gets called terrible, terrible ageist names and sexist names, and she has more wisdom than anyone. And so, for that reason, she's, I think, the most powerful member of the cast.
I think if I wasn't offered Richard, I'd settle for Buckingham, because he's such a smooth operator. He's such a convincing, helper to Richard, so smug and so sure of his own wit and so kind of disdainful of Richard, contemptuous. He thinks he's using Richard, and he doesn't realise how much he's being used, and so his downfall comes as a terrible shock, total shock. And he's so like one of those White House aides or one of those people advising the president. He's got so smooth and credible and silver-tongued, the perfect accomplice. And his downfall is a terrific shock, and I'd find him very, very convincing.
And he's one of Richard's longest friends.
Yeah.
Sticks with him until he also gets the shot. Played brilliantly by James Evans, who's the Associate Director at Bell Shakespeare, who actually bought me this pen, which is from the King Richard III Visitor Centre, which is in Leicester. All right. Let's hand over to the audience for questions. We will need to pass a microphone, which Lydia will help us. So if you do want to ask a question to our panel, please raise your hand and we will bring the microphone over to you. Thank you.
I'm intrigued by Kate having pointed out that his disability came with pain. And I'm wondering whether there's any sign in the play that Shakespeare was conscious of that.
I absolutely think there is... evidence of his pain, the halting. You limp and you halt often because of a pain that always gets me. The halting, that to me is the first sign, and it's said in the first soliloquy that dogs bark as I halt by them. That he lives in pain. There's another moment that always breaks my heart is when the prince says, "Bear me on your back, bear me on your shoulders," and Richard very quickly changes the subject. And one of my biggest fears is my godchildren jumping on me, you know, when we're playing. And there's something about that very funny, playful scene where he says they're not going to live long and tells us what he's going to do. But the prince threatening to jump on the ape's back, and the change in temperature at that moment, I immediately go, he's terrified of getting hurt. So there are these little breadcrumbs all through the play. I'm sure there's plenty more as well, but they're the two that really jump out at me most. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Anyone else?
Way up the back.
All right, we'll wait for the mic.
The question's directed to Kate and Tom, I suppose. I've always wondered how disabled Richard could possibly be and still be the good soldier that he is universally acknowledged as being. And your thing about the horse has helped that one a lot. Is there anything else? Because I cannot see someone with a caliper or crutches or anything ever having been a decent soldier.
Well, I really highly recommend a documentary that was on SBS a couple of years ago. I really wish I could work out what it was called. I don't think it would be hard to Google it, but it was about the bringing up of the bones and what Richard really, really would have been like. And they did find this young man in England, same age, almost exactly the same measurements and the same scoliosis. And they put him through the ringer of all the things that he... Yes? Dominic Smee. We have people here from the Richard III Society and the Plantagenet Society. Can you put up your hands so that people can see you if they want to ask you questions? Dominic Smee. Wasn't he fabulous? Isn't he fabulous? And so they put, and he did quite well in that, in the saddle. But yes, but also the armour, because it acts as a back brace. And so really, I mean, I find the same. I love a corset piece, because it means that I don't have to wear my special underclothes that help keep me upright on stage. But if I'm wearing a corset, I don't need to wear those. So I expect he's in exactly the same position, and Richard would have been in the same position as well. That there were, strangely enough, elements of the time that would have assisted him rather than burdened him.
There's also a theory, I don't know if the Richard III Society agrees with this one, that his favourite weapon historically was the battle axe. And by using it so constantly, his shoulder became somewhat enlarged, and that gave rise to the myth about the humpback. That's another theory. Have you heard that one? You heard that one. Do you think it's maybe true? Forceful argument. Okay, thank you.
I mean, this is more of a general comment about disability generally. I mean, there's the difference between being born with a disability and acquiring one, because if you're born, you don't know anything else, so you can be as strong as you like, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also on that note, I have to say that an important thing about disabled actors being able to play Richard III is the fact that disabled people come at a character a different way. We walk through life or wheel ourselves through lives in a different way. We have to, if we see a set of stairs, we have to work out some kind of way that we're going to get up it. And that's worldwide, that's what it's like when you have a disability. You come at life a different way. So if you take all of it, and it makes us very cunning and very cheeky, and it means we have quite a mischief to us because we have to think of different ways. Now, if you add that to a character, it's a really, really great way to open up a character and elements of that character that you may not have seen before. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you. A question down here.
Sorry, just following on from that, Kate. So you said when Richard was found in the car park that you had never played the character, you could relate physically. I imagine had you thought you might have an opportunity to play Richard? Is that something
No.
you considered? And I imagine it's not. So it must have been, yeah. No. How did it feel to get that opportunity?
Incredible. I mean, I've been very lucky to play many male characters, many able-bodied male characters, so many thanks to Bell Shakespeare. But Richard, I knew him. I mean, always mythical, but it was never, ever on my radar. No way. And then all of a sudden, at the same time, the bones got pulled up. We had this weird phone call saying you're related to him, and then Peter Evans said...
Yeah, you need to talk about the phone call.
Oh, my mum called me and said, she said, I just got this phone call from this police officer in Broome. And I went, is everything okay? What? And she said, no, he's doing his family tree, he's done all the genetic stuff, and apparently we're related. And he said we're related to, one of the kings from Shakespeare. My mum's an English teacher. She hates Shakespeare. And she said to me as a kid, don't study Shakespeare, you'll never use it. And she hates me telling that story, but too bad. So she said, you know, the guy, he's a king. And I was like, Mum, which king? Come on. She said, the one in the car park with the funny back. And I went, that's Richard III. And I'd just been offered the role. So that was, it all kind of happened at once. And at that moment, maybe I thought it was a bit kind of hippy-trippy-dippy, the stars aligning. But it made sense. As soon as I started work on the script, I went, this makes sense. And I'm just so honoured, particularly as someone with a disability, to take this on. I saw Tom play the role. Extraordinary. I never got to see you play the role, JB. Do it again.
Still time.
You were too young.
Can I be your Buckingham? But yeah, it's an honour to play the role, and to, even if his legacy isn't necessarily beautiful in the play, it's lovely to find other aspects to him, to climb the staircase that is him in our own way.
Any other questions?
No, I wondered, please. Shakespeare absolutely had to portray Richard as a dreadful villain because he was a Tudor and because Ben Jonson would later be proof that you did not do anything that offended the monarchy of your time. You've actually talked a lot about the empathy of Richard, but I was wondering, given that Richard is always going out to comment on scenes by saying at the end, I am such a villain, and by announcing himself to be the villain, and the way you've got the villainy at the end with the dream and all the ghosts rising up between him and Richmond, is it possible to think of it as Shakespeare piling it on really thickly, but piling it on almost too thickly, so that the audience will see, well, this is what you've got to do, but he's slyly undercutting it to promote the empathy? Or is that a really crazy way of thinking he might have thought?
Well, all those lines can be said tongue-in-cheek. I'm a villain. It doesn't have to be with full sincerity. I mean, I think that's the way I approached it. You know, the world sees me as this, so I'm going to play it. And that's the way I solved a lot of those lines, I thought. Yeah, I mean, I always thought that the ghosts at the end was he got to where he wanted, and then it all caught up with him, and his paranoia kicked in, and he went, oh, actually, I've behaved really terribly, and I'm going to die. I think that's the moment where he starts to panic, because up until that point, he's playing this idea of the villain that the world has projected onto him.
I think even though, there is an official line, and to go over that would be very dangerous. So all the plays are censored in the period; they're looked at by the Master of the Revels, and only passed to go onto the stage once he's looked at them. But the particular histories that Shakespeare's dealing with in these plays were very contentious, and not long after Richard III was written, you were forbidden completely to write anything about these histories in prose and publish it as a history, as a pamphlet or a book. But you could still put on plays. And so there is a bit of license allowed in the drama to ask questions, to fly a little bit under the radar. For some reason, they didn't ban dramatic depictions of this time in history, but they did ban any other versions, no poetry depicting this period of time, no prose histories depicting this period of time, because it was too contentious for Elizabeth to deal with. But they let the plays go ahead, and I think he played with that, yeah.
Okay, look, we probably have one more question. This lady has been waiting for some time. Thank you.
Mine's not a question. Mine is a thank you. This has been one of the most mesmerising experiences of my whole life. Your knowledge, your experience, your empathy has just been extraordinary. I studied law, and if I had seen this many, many years ago, I won't say quite how many years ago, I would have studied English. So I hope that this is being recorded and that every school child in Australia sees this, because it has been a fantastic evening. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.